Hello and welcome to Biz Daily. I'm Jon Jordan. So the news today is that Japanese free-to-play mobile developer Gumi has announced that it's setting up its first development studio in Europe. So it's announced that that's going to be set up in Berlin. It already has some studios in Europe, so it has one in Paris, has one in Stockholm as well, in Sweden. But those aren't developing games, they're kind of supporting the games that Gumi already has kind of released in the European market. So the most famous game it has is called Brave Frontier. It's been a massive kind of hit in Japan, but as Japanese games kind of sometimes tend to be, it is very focused on the Japanese market. So it hasn't really translated incredibly well to the North American and the European market. So it's doing okay, but Gumi kind of understands, as many companies do, particularly in Asia, that the games that it makes, millions of pounds off, millions of dollars off, or yen, I suppose, billions of yen off in its local kind of market, don't often translate. And if you do want to translate, you can sometimes have to spend a lot of marketing money to do that. So it's kind of made the decision that the more sensible thing to do is have development in these individual regions. So it's already set up studios in North America, so it has one in Vancouver and also one in San Francisco, and so that covers the North American market, and now it's setting this one up in Berlin. But what's kind of interesting is they're going for a very kind of tight approach. So they're looking maybe to only have like 10 to 15 people, very experienced developers, and they're going to spend a lot of time kind of thinking about the type of game they're going to make and the exact processes. So they want to make a strategy game. Everyone knows strategy games work very well. Kind of Clash of Clans clearly has proven that, and that's a very something that works very well, particularly in the North American and European markets. Not so well in Japan necessarily. So they're going to kind of come at this design problem and spend a lot of time kind of experimenting. So what we've seen in the strategy field at the moment is lots of people kind of redoing Clash of Clans with different themes, or kind of adding card-based elements, or adding heroes, and and not necessarily taking the basic gameplay on much further than it has been for the last couple of years. And the idea with the guys playing Gumi is they want to spend time, and they actually want risk. They're talking to them, and they say we want have to have risk in our development process, because that's the only way we'll come up with something new. And I think that's kind of quite a brave decision, because obviously the more risk you have, the more likely you are to fail. Equally, their point of view is the more risk you have in that process, the more likely you are to have a big hit. And now obviously where we have mobile games that are billion-dollar franchises, that's kind of what you need to be aiming at if you've got the money. And so Gumi are pretty well funded. They IPO'd on the Tokyo Stock Exchange at the end of 2014, so they're well funded and they're doing this kind of big expansion. And I guess the other interesting thing is why they're looking to go to Berlin. So Berlin doesn't have a massive history of mobile game development. There are some companies like Wuga already there, but a lot of the German developers are in places like Hamburg, and Berlin to date has been really good for kind of mobile marketing and advertising companies, and mobile internet and general internet companies indeed. Not so much for kind of games companies. And I think now we're seeing a bit of a shift where some of those mobile monetization and internet companies, the people are kind of leaving those kind of companies as they get consolidated and bought, and kind of that market matures a little bit. But now we're kind of seeing those guys who are always very smart and obviously know the industry, being kind of paired up with mobile game developers or console game developers, and creating these new studios. So interestingly, there's another company called Clang who they're a startup from the EVE Online developer CCP, and they got funded last week by London Venture Partners, who were a funder of Supercell in the early days. So I think we're kind of seeing at these different levels very small startups like Clang, and kind of more established companies like Gumi setting up in Berlin. And I think this is what we'll see for the next kind of year or so, that the kind of Berlin cluster will start kind of coming to the fore. And I think we've seen really for a year or so Germany kind of rising as a mobile free-to-play kind of power, and I think we're going to see that continue. So we'll keep an eye on what Gumi get up to. Certainly be interesting. I don't think there'll be anything 2015, so we're probably waiting for probably a year or so before we see what their kind of high risk, high reward strategy comes up with. But should be interesting. Anyway, come back tomorrow and see what the news is then. See you then.